My best friend chose her nightclub boyfriend over me and said that I have the personality of a wallpaper. 3 months later, she was begging for my help. Me and Tara had been best friends since middle school. We did everything together for 15 years. Same college, same spring breaks, same Friday night tradition of movies and wine at my place. She was like a sister to me. Then she started dating this guy Blake, who worked at some nightclub downtown. Suddenly, Tara was too cool for everything we used to do. She'd show up to my apartment drunk at 2 a.m., expecting me to let her crash, then mock my pajamas for being childish. They had cartoon cats on them, but so what? She'd eat all my food and leave the mess, saying I was uptight for caring about dishes. When I planned her birthday dinner at her favorite restaurant, she showed up 2 hours late with Blake and his friends, then complained the whole time that the place was lame. She actually said I had no taste in front of everyone. Blake laughed and said at least I tried. I'd spent $300 on that dinner. She started calling me only when she needed things. Rides at 3 a.m. because she was too drunk to drive. Money for concert tickets she couldn't afford. Someone to watch her dog when she'd disappear for days. But when I needed her, she was always busy. When my dad had surgery, she texted saying hospitals depressed her. When I got promoted at work, she said corporate jobs were soul-crushing and changed the subject. The worst was my birthday. She promised we'd do our traditional movie marathon like always. I bought all her favorite snacks, cleaned my whole apartment, even got the special wine she liked. She never showed. Posted pictures from some pool party at Blake's instead. When I asked what happened, she said I needed to stop being so clingy and expecting her to be boring just because I was. Said maybe if I went out more, I'd understand that sitting at home watching movies wasn't living. Called me pathetic for still caring about traditions. After that, she'd only contact me to borrow things. My leather jacket for some event, my laptop when hers broke, my car when she needed to move. She'd return everything damaged or late or not at all. When I asked for my jacket back after 2 months, she said I was being materialistic and should learn to share. She'd gotten wine on it and tried to hide the stain with a safety pin. Then she started bringing Blake around just to mock me. They'd show up uninvited and make fun of my book collection, my cooking, my clothes. Blake would ask why I didn't have a boyfriend, and Tara would say it was because I dressed like a librarian and had the personality of wallpaper. They'd laugh like it was the funniest thing ever. When I told her that hurt, she said I needed to develop thicker skin and stop being so sensitive. One night she called crying, saying Blake had cheated. I let her come over even though I was done with her drama. She cried for hours about how she'd given up everything for him, how she'd lost herself trying to be cool enough. I made her tea and listened like I always did. The next morning she was back with Blake and told everyone I was jealous and had tried to break them up. Said I couldn't handle her being happy. Our mutual friends started avoiding me. 6 months later, Blake dumped her for some bartender. Tara lost the apartment they'd shared, lost the friend group that was really his, lost the lifestyle she'd been living off his money. She showed up at my door with boxes, assuming she could move in. When I said no, she called me heartless, said real friends help each other. I reminded her she'd said we weren't really friends anymore, just people with shared history. She pretended not to remember saying that. She moved back with her parents and got a job at a department store. Started reaching out constantly, wanting to restart our traditions. Sending me memes about best friends, asking to hang out every weekend. I never responded. Then last month she applied for a position at my company, same department I manage, put me down as a reference without asking. HR called me, and I was honest. I told Felix that I appreciated him letting me know and that I understood they needed to make the best decision for the team. After I hung up, my hands were shaking, so much I had to put my phone down on my desk. I stared at my computer screen without actually seeing anything on it. Part of me felt this huge wave of relief because I wouldn't have to work with Tara every day, wouldn't have to watch her pretend everything was fine between us while she needed something from me. But there was also this guilt sitting heavy in my stomach because I knew exactly what this rejection would mean for her. She'd been counting on this job to get her life back on track after everything fell apart with Blake. I picked up my pen and tried to focus on the quarterly report I'd been working on, but the words just blurred together. My manager walked past my cubicle and asked if I was okay, and I said I was fine, just tired. I reminded myself over and over that I'd only told the truth. I didn't make up lies about Tara or exaggerate what happened between us. I just answered HR's questions honestly about her reliability and work ethic based on how she'd treated me for 2 years. She'd ruined my belongings, missed important events, mocked me in front of other people, and accused me of trying to sabotage her relationship when I was the only one who showed up for her. If she couldn't be a decent friend, why would I lie and say she'd be a good employee? 2 days later, I was coming home from the grocery store with bags in both hands when I saw Tara standing in my apartment building lobby. Her face was red and blotchy like she'd been crying, but her eyes were angry, not sad. I felt my whole body tense up as I walked through the door. She didn't even wait for me to set my bags down before she started yelling about what I'd said to HR. She said I sabotaged her chance at a fresh start, that I destroyed the one opportunity she had to get her life together. I put my grocery bags on the floor by the mailboxes and told her as calmly as I could that I was honest about our history and her reliability. I pointed out that she put my name down as a reference without even asking me first, which was really unfair and put me in a bad position. She acted like I owed her a good reference just because we used to be friends. I told her that using someone as a reference without permission is not okay, especially when that person manages the department you're applying to. She kept interrupting me, saying I could have just told HR we lost touch instead of destroying her reputation. Tara completely exploded then. She said I was mean and petty for holding grudges about things that happened when she was going through such a hard time with Blake. She claimed I never supported her relationship and was jealous that she was happy and had an exciting life while I sat at home watching movies alone. I felt my face getting hot because I couldn't believe she was rewriting history like this. I reminded her that she called me wallpaper, that she ruined my leather jacket and refused to replace it, that she posted pictures from Blake's pool party while she was supposed to be at my birthday celebration. I told her I was the only person who showed up when Blake cheated on her, the only one who made her tea and listened to her cry for hours. And then she went back to him the next morning and told everyone I tried to break them up because I was jealous. She just stared at me like I was making it all up. She said I was exaggerating everything and making her sound terrible when she was just living her life, and I couldn't handle not being the center of attention anymore. The argument got louder, and other people in the building were definitely hearing us. Tara said that real friends forgive each other and help each other rebuild when they're struggling, not tear each other down when they're already at their lowest point. She said I was kicking her when she was down and that she'd never do something like this to me. I felt something snap inside me because she had done exactly this to me, over and over. I told her that real friends don't show up drunk at 2 a.m. expecting free housing and then mock your pajamas. Real friends don't ghost you when your dad has surgery because hospitals are depressing. Real friends don't borrow your car and return it damaged, or take your laptop and spill coffee on it, or disappear for days while you're watching their dog. She tried to interrupt, but I kept going. I said real friends show up to the birthday dinner you planned and paid $300 for, and they definitely don't call you pathetic for caring about traditions. Her face went pale, and then red again. She screamed that I would regret this when I needed someone and had nobody left, that I was going to end up alone because I was too uptight and judgmental to keep friends. Then she shoved past me and left the building. I stood there shaking, my heart beating so hard I could feel it in my throat. That same evening, my phone buzzed with a message from Nolan Archer. We'd all gone to college together, but I hadn't talked to him much since graduation. He said Tara had called him crying about how I destroyed her job opportunity out of pure spite. He asked if we could talk, because he'd been hearing both our names come up in friend group conversations and wanted to understand what actually happened. I stared at the message for a long time, feeling exhausted at the idea of having to defend myself and explain everything again. But I also knew that Tara was probably calling everyone we knew and spinning her version of events, and if I didn't talk to people, they'd only hear her side. I texted back and agreed to meet him for coffee the next day. I barely slept that night, going over everything in my head and wondering how many other people she'd already called. The next afternoon, I met Nolan at a coffee shop near campus. He looked uncomfortable as soon as I sat down, like he didn't really want to be there but felt like he had to be. He started by saying he'd heard Tara's version where she made one mistake at my birthday, and I'd been punishing her ever since, refusing to forgive her, and now actively trying to ruin her life. I took a deep breath and walked him through the actual timeline, starting from when she began dating Blake 2 years ago. I told him about the pattern of showing up drunk and mocking me, about the $300 dinner she dismissed as lame, about missing my dad's surgery and my work promotion. I explained about my birthday when she promised our traditional movie marathon, and then posted pictures from Blake's pool party instead. I told him about the leather jacket she ruined and refused to take responsibility for, about bringing Blake around just to make fun of my apartment and my books and my clothes. Nolan listened quietly, his coffee getting cold in front of him. I could see his expression changing as I talked, like pieces were clicking together in his mind. When I finished, Nolan asked why I never said anything before about how she was treating me. I told him I kept hoping she'd go back to being the friend I knew for 13 years, the person who used to actually care about me and show up for things that mattered. I said I made excuses for her behavior for way too long because of our history. He nodded slowly, and then admitted that Tara had been difficult in their friendship too. He said she borrowed money and never paid it back, canceled plans at the last minute constantly, and only called when she needed something. He mentioned that she'd asked him for $200 last month for rent, and then got mad when he said he could only give her $50. I felt this wave of validation hearing that I wasn't the only one experiencing this, but I also felt sad that this was who Tara had become. We sat there for a while longer, both of us processing how someone we'd known for so long had changed so much. Over the next week, 3 more people from our college friend group reached out with basically the same question about what happened with the job reference. Each conversation felt like I was on trial, having to prove I wasn't the bad guy. Zoe Burnett was the only one who immediately said she believed me, and that she'd watched Tara treat me badly for years. She said she'd seen Tara mock my clothes at a party once, and it made her uncomfortable. But she didn't say anything at the time. The other friends seemed like they were gathering information to decide whose side to take, asking careful questions and staying neutral. It felt so tiring and childish, like we were back in high school drama. I answered their questions honestly, but I could tell some of them still weren't sure what to believe. Then I got this really long text from someone I barely remembered from college, some guy who lived on our floor freshman year. He sent me this whole lecture about how friends are supposed to support each other through mistakes and personal growth, and that everyone deserves second chances. He said I was being cruel and unforgiving, and that Tara was really hurting right now. I read the whole thing feeling more and more angry because this person didn't know anything about what actually happened between us. He was just repeating whatever story Tara had told him. I realized she must have been reaching out to anyone who might know both of us, anyone she could find on social media who went to our school, trying to build support and frame herself as the victim of my cruelty. I started typing a response explaining everything, but then I stopped and deleted it. I couldn't control the story she was telling, and defending myself to near strangers felt pointless and exhausting. A few days later, Zoe invited me to lunch at this sandwich place we used to go to in college. She told me she was proud of me for setting boundaries with Tara, even though it was messy and uncomfortable and causing all this drama in our friend group. She said watching me stand up for myself had made her think about her own friendship with Tara. She admitted she'd been slowly reducing contact over the past year because every single interaction felt like a transaction, like Tara only reached out when she needed something or wanted to complain about her life. Zoe said she was tired of feeling drained after every conversation, tired of lending things that never got returned, tired of making plans that got canceled at the last minute. We talked for over an hour about how hard it is to end long friendships, even when they've become really toxic, because you keep thinking about all those years of history and all the good memories from before. But we both agreed that sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is walk away from people who don't value you, no matter how long you've known them. 2 weeks passed before Tara's mom reached out through Facebook. The notification made my stomach twist because I'd known her since I was 12 years old, back when she'd drive us to the mall and buy us matching friendship bracelets. Her message was short, but loaded with guilt. She said Tara was really struggling and could we please talk. She mentioned that Tara had been crying every day since the job rejection. I stared at the message for a long time, remembering how she used to make us pancakes on Saturday mornings and let us stay up late watching movies. She'd always been kind to me, treated me like a second daughter. Now she was asking me to fix her actual daughter's problems Tara had created herself. I agreed to meet her because saying no to someone who'd shown me nothing but kindness felt wrong, even though I knew it would be uncomfortable. The restaurant she picked was quiet, the kind of place where older people had lunch on weekdays. She was already sitting at a corner table when I arrived, and the first thing I noticed was how tired she looked. Her hair had more gray than I remembered, and the lines around her eyes seemed deeper. She stood up and hugged me, which made everything harder because it reminded me of all those years when her family felt like my family too. We ordered coffee, and she thanked me for coming, her hands wrapped around her mug like she was cold, even though the restaurant was warm. She started talking about how Tara had moved back home after Blake, how she'd lost her friend group and her apartment, and basically her whole life. She said the job rejection felt like another door closing when Tara was already trapped in a hallway with no exits. I watched her talk and felt genuine sympathy for her as a parent watching her daughter fall apart. But I also needed to be honest about why I couldn't be Tara's support system anymore, why I couldn't keep setting myself on fire to keep her warm. I took a breath and started explaining the years of mistreatment, walking her through specific incidents instead of vague complaints. I told her about the $300 birthday dinner where Tara showed up 2 hours late and complained the whole time. About my birthday when she promised our traditional movie marathon and then posted pictures from Blake's pool party instead. About my leather jacket she ruined and refused to take responsibility for. About how she'd only call when she needed something, but was always too busy when I needed her. About my dad's surgery that she couldn't be bothered to show up for because hospitals depressed her. Tara's mom listened without interrupting, her face getting sadder with each example. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment, stirring her coffee even though she hadn't added anything to it. Then she admitted she'd seen some of these patterns herself. The entitlement when things didn't go her way. The lack of accountability when she messed up. The tendency to blame everyone else when things went wrong. She said Tara had always been a bit self-centered, but it had gotten worse over the years, like she expected the world to revolve around her needs and got angry when it didn't. She thanked me for being honest and said she understood why I needed to protect myself. She wasn't asking me to change my mind anymore, just trying to understand what had happened to the friendship she'd watched for 15 years. A month after the HR call, I was settling into my decision and feeling more at peace with it than I expected. Work was going really well, and I'd gotten positive feedback on a project I'd been managing for months. I'd been spending more time with Madeline Rivers, a colleague from a different team who I'd known casually, but never hung out with much. We started grabbing lunch regularly after running into each other in the break room one day, and I was surprised by how easy it was to talk to her. She made me laugh in a way that felt uncomplicated and genuine, not like she was performing or trying to be someone she wasn't. We talked about normal things like our weekend plans and shows we were watching, and she actually remembered details from previous conversations instead of just waiting for her turn to talk. It reminded me what healthy friendships should feel like, the give and take that had been missing with Tara for so long. Madeline would ask how my dad was doing after his surgery, actually wanting to know the answer. She'd celebrate my work wins without making it about herself or diminishing my accomplishments. It was such a basic level of friendship, but it felt revolutionary after years of Tara's self-absorption. I found myself thinking about specific memories from the friendship, not just the bad times with Blake, but earlier moments that maybe showed warning signs I'd ignored. There was the time in college when Tara borrowed my car for a job interview and returned it with an empty gas tank and a scratch on the bumper she never mentioned. When I pointed out the scratch, she acted like I was being petty for caring about it, said it was barely noticeable and I was making a big deal out of nothing. Or the way she'd cancel our plans if something better came up, but if I had to reschedule, she'd get upset and accuse me of not prioritizing our friendship. She'd expect me to drop everything when she had a crisis, show up at midnight when she needed to talk, but when I was going through something, she'd send a text saying she was busy and we'd catch up later. That later never came unless she needed something from me again. I remembered lending her money for rent once in our early 20s, $200 I really couldn't afford to give away. She promised to pay me back in 2 weeks when she got paid. 3 months later, I finally asked about it, and she got defensive, said I was being materialistic and that real friends didn't keep score. I never got that money back. The realization hit me hard one evening when I was making dinner in my apartment. I'd been making excuses for her behavior for years before Blake even entered the picture. He didn't create her selfishness or her lack of consideration or her expectation that friendship was about what others could provide her. He just amplified traits that were already there, made them more obvious and harder to ignore. This realization was both painful and liberating because it meant ending the friendship wasn't just about recent events, but about a fundamental incompatibility in how we viewed relationships. I'd been operating under the belief that friendship meant mutual support and respect, that you showed up for people who showed up for you. Tara had been operating under the belief that friendship meant having people available when she needed them, no questions asked, with no obligation to reciprocate. Those two worldviews couldn't coexist in a healthy friendship, and I'd been trying to force them together for way too long. Zoe called me a few days later with news that Tara had gotten a job at a different company across town. I felt genuinely glad to hear it, Because I'd never wanted her to fail completely. I just couldn't lie to help her get a position in my department, where I'd have to work with her every day. Zoe mentioned that Tara was still really angry with me, apparently telling people I'd sabotaged her out of jealousy and spite. But at least she had some stability now, a paycheck, and a reason to get up in the morning. Zoe said it felt like the best possible outcome given the circumstances, that Tara could rebuild her life without me having to compromise my boundaries or professional integrity. I agreed, even though part of me felt sad that this was where 15 years of friendship had ended up, with us in different companies in different parts of the city, actively avoiding each other. 6 weeks after everything started, I ran into Tara unexpectedly at the bookstore in our neighborhood. I was browsing the fiction section, completely absorbed in reading back cover descriptions, when I looked up and saw her 3 aisles over. We both froze, and the air between us felt thick and heavy, with everything unsaid. She was holding a self-help book about toxic relationships, which felt so ironic I almost laughed, except nothing about the situation was actually funny. I nodded politely, the kind of acknowledgement you'd give a stranger, and moved to a different section of the store. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears, and I kept expecting her to follow me or try to start a conversation. When she didn't, I felt this weird mix of relief and disappointment, like maybe part of me had wanted her to apologize, or at least try to explain herself. That night, my phone lit up with a text from Tara. It was the first time she'd contacted me since our lobby argument, and seeing her name on my screen made my stomach clench. The message said we needed to talk like adults, that we couldn't keep avoiding each other forever in a city this size. She suggested meeting for coffee to clear the air, said our 15-year friendship deserved better than this cold war we were waging. I stared at the message for a long time, feeling the pull of all those years of history, all the good memories from before everything went wrong. But I also remembered every time she'd dismissed my feelings or needs, every time she'd made me feel small or stupid for caring about things that mattered to me. I thought about that $300 birthday dinner and my ruined leather jacket and my dad's surgery she couldn't be bothered to show up for. I thought about the wallpaper comment and how they'd laughed like my personality was the funniest joke they'd ever heard. I agreed to meet her, but only in a public place and with clear boundaries about what I was willing to discuss. We met at a coffee shop halfway between our apartments, neutral territory where neither of us had the advantage. The awkwardness hit me the second I walked in and saw her sitting at a corner table. She looked different, less makeup and more tired, like the party girl thing had been stripped away and what was left was just a regular person struggling to keep it together. She'd always been the type to show up looking perfect, even when she was falling apart, but now she just looked worn down. I ordered my coffee and sat across from her, and for a few seconds, neither of us said anything. The silence felt loaded with 15 years of friendship and 6 months of anger and hurt. She opened her mouth to speak, and I braced myself for whatever came next, knowing this conversation would either start healing something or finish breaking it completely. She opened her mouth, and words started coming out about how sorry she was, how she'd been thinking about what happened between us, how she wanted to make things right. I sat there with my coffee getting cold in my hands, watching her face while she talked. She said she was sorry about my birthday, about not showing up when she'd promised to do our movie marathon. She was sorry about the jacket, about the wine stain she'd tried to hide with that safety pin. She was sorry for calling me wallpaper, for laughing when Blake made fun of my apartment and my books and my clothes. Each apology came out like a separate item on a grocery list, one thing after another, and I could feel something tightening in my chest as I listened. She kept saying she knew she'd messed up, that she'd made mistakes, that she wished she could take back specific things she'd said or done. But the way she was talking made it sound like these were all separate problems, like if she just apologized for each incident individually, then we could move past it. She never once mentioned the pattern, never acknowledged that this wasn't about a few bad moments, but about years of treating me like I only mattered when she needed something. I didn't interrupt, because I wanted to hear what she'd say, wanted to see if she'd get there on her own. She kept circling back to Blake, saying she'd been going through a hard time, saying the relationship had changed her in ways she didn't understand at the time. Everything was about context and circumstances, about how stressed she was, or how confused she felt. When she finally stopped talking, she looked at me like she expected me to say it was okay, like listing out her regrets was enough to fix everything that had broken between us. I put my coffee down and told her the individual things weren't really what this was about. The birthday and the jacket and the wallpaper comment were symptoms of something bigger, something that had been wrong for a long time. I said our friendship stopped being mutual years ago, stopped being about both of us, and became just about what I could do for her. She looked frustrated right away, her eyebrows pulling together, and she said I was being too harsh. "Everyone makes mistakes," she said. "Everyone goes through rough patches in their friendships." I pointed out that I'd been going through things too during those years. My dad had surgery, and she couldn't be bothered to show up at the hospital because it depressed her. I got promoted at work, and she changed the subject because corporate jobs were soul-crushing. I'd needed her just as much as she'd needed me, but the difference was I'd actually shown up for her. She shook her head and said I was keeping score, that real friendships weren't about tallying up who did what for whom. I told her that reciprocity wasn't keeping score, it was basic respect, and she'd stopped respecting me a long time before Blake ever dumped her. The conversation kept going in circles after that. She'd insist she'd changed, that she was different now, that she understood what she'd done wrong. I'd explain that I needed to protect myself from getting hurt again, that I couldn't just forget years of being treated like I didn't matter. She got emotional, her voice getting higher, asking what she was supposed to do if I wouldn't give her another chance. Her eyes were wet, and she kept touching her coffee cup without drinking from it. I told her she needed to work on herself for her own sake, not because she wanted to win me back. Maybe we just weren't meant to be in each other's lives anymore, I said. Maybe 15 years of history didn't mean we had to force something that had stopped working. She wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand and said I was giving up too easily, that I was throwing away our entire friendship over things that happened when she was in a bad place. I reminded her that she'd thrown it away first when she decided I was too boring to be worth her time. That shut her up for a minute, but then she started in again about how she'd been lost, how Blake had messed with her head, how she hadn't been thinking clearly. I asked if she'd been not thinking clearly for 2 solid years, because that's how long she'd been treating me badly. She didn't have an answer for that. We left the coffee shop without fixing anything. I walked out feeling like someone had wrung me out and hung me up to dry, completely drained, but also somehow clearer about everything. Her apology had been about making herself feel better, about checking boxes so she could say she'd tried. It wasn't about actually understanding what she'd done to me, or how it had felt to be dismissed and mocked and used for years. I got to my car and sat there for a few minutes before starting the engine, just breathing and trying to settle the churning in my stomach. My phone was in my hand before I really thought about it, and I was texting Zoe about the meeting. She responded almost immediately saying she was proud of me for going, asking how it went. I told her Tara had apologized for specific things, but still seemed more focused on being forgiven than on actual change. Zoe sent back 3 angry face emojis and said that sounded exactly like Tara, always looking for the quick fix instead of doing real work on herself. 2 months went by and I didn't hear from Tara again. Work got busy, and I threw myself into a big project, stayed late most nights, went out for drinks with Madeline and some other colleagues on Fridays. Then I got invited to a birthday party for someone we'd both known in college, this guy named Derek, who'd been in our study group sophomore year. I almost didn't go because I was tired, and social events felt like a lot of effort lately, but Madeline convinced me I needed to get out more. I showed up at Derek's apartment with a bottle of wine and a card, walked in expecting the usual party scene. Instead, I saw Tara standing by the kitchen counter, talking to someone I didn't recognize, and my whole body went cold. Derek saw my face, and his expression shifted to pure horror, like he'd just realized he'd done something terrible. He rushed over and apologized in a whisper, said he'd invited us both without thinking about it, asked if I wanted to leave. I looked at Tara across the room, and she was staring right back at me, and I made a decision right there. I told Derek it was fine, that I wasn't going to avoid social events just because Tara might be there. I was tired of letting our broken friendship control what I did or where I went. The party felt wrong from the start, though, this thick, awkward tension hanging over everything, even though most people probably didn't know what was going on. Tara stayed on one side of the room, and I stayed on the other, both of us making small talk with different groups of people, never directly interacting. I caught her watching me a few times when I was talking to someone, her face unreadable, and I wondered what was going through her head. Did she regret coming? Was she angry I was there? Did she want to try talking again? Several of our mutual friends seemed uncomfortable, laughing too loud at jokes that weren't that funny, asking questions with too much enthusiasm, like they were trying to prove everything was normal. I realized our conflict had messed up the whole friend group dynamic. People felt like they had to choose sides, or at least be careful about what they said around either of us. It wasn't fair to them, but I didn't know how to fix it without compromising my own boundaries. Tara approached me later when I was alone getting another drink from the cooler on the back porch. She said my name quietly, and I turned around, surprised she was actually talking to me. She told me she'd been thinking about our coffee shop conversation and wanted me to know she'd started therapy. I said that was good, and I meant it, that I hoped it helped her figure things out. But I also told her it didn't change my boundaries, that I still needed space from our friendship. She looked hurt, her mouth tightening, but she nodded. We stood there in awkward silence for what felt like forever, but was probably only 30 seconds, neither of us knowing what else to say. Then someone else came out to the porch, and the moment broke, and Tara went back inside without another word. I left the party feeling different from I'd expected to feel. Being in the same space as Tara had been uncomfortable, but it hadn't destroyed me. I'd survived it, had even managed to have some decent conversations with other people despite the weirdness. I didn't owe her warmth or friendship just because we were at the same event, and I didn't have to let her presence control my choices about where I went or what I did. I drove home feeling proud of myself for staying, for not running away or letting the situation chase me out of a social event I had every right to attend. Nolan sent me a message the following week, saying he'd been thinking about our conversation from months ago. He said he'd started noticing patterns in his own friendship with Tara that made him uncomfortable. She'd recently asked to borrow money for rent, he told me, and when he'd suggested setting up a payment plan instead of just giving it to her, she'd gotten angry. Called him a bad friend, said he was being cheap and heartless when she was struggling. He was starting to understand why I'd set the boundaries I did, he said. I felt validated, but also sad that he was going through the same thing I'd gone through. I told him I was sorry she was treating him that way, that he deserved better from his friendships. 3 months after the whole job thing started, Zoe called me on a Saturday afternoon. She said she'd heard something I needed to know about, that Tara had been telling people a revised version of our history. According to what Zoe had heard from multiple sources, Tara was now saying she'd been the devoted friend, and I'd always been jealous and competitive. In this new story, I'd sabotaged her job application out of envy for her relationship with Blake and her social life, out of bitterness that she'd been happy while I was alone. Zoe was angry on my behalf, asking if I wanted her to correct people when she heard this version. I told her no, that trying to control the narrative would just create more drama. I was frustrated, but not surprised. Of course, Tara was rewriting history to make herself the victim. That's what she'd always done when things didn't go her way. The thing that got to me most was hearing the story from people who hadn't been around for any of it. Someone from college who I barely remembered sent me a message asking if I was okay after what happened with Tara, then proceeded to tell me how sad it was that jealousy could destroy such a beautiful friendship. I stared at my phone, wondering how this person even knew about us, let alone felt qualified to comment. Another acquaintance from work mentioned hearing I'd had a falling out with my best friend and said she hoped we could work it out because life was too short for grudges. I smiled and changed the subject because what was I supposed to say? That it wasn't a grudge, but a boundary. That I wasn't holding on to anger, but protecting myself from more hurt. I drafted a Facebook post 3 different times explaining my side, laying out the timeline of everything Tara had done. Each version got longer and more detailed as I remembered additional incidents. The birthday dinner, the ruined jacket, the hospital text about my dad. But every time I read it back, it sounded defensive and petty, like I was trying too hard to justify myself. I deleted all 3 drafts and closed the app. Posting publicly would just create more drama and make me look like I couldn't let things go. People who wanted to believe Tara's version would find reasons to dismiss mine anyway. So instead, I focused on the friendships I actually had, the people who showed up consistently and treated me with respect. I responded to Zoe's texts. I grabbed lunch with colleagues who made me laugh. I let my actions and character speak for themselves, rather than trying to control a narrative I couldn't really control anyway. Madeline stopped by my desk on a Tuesday afternoon with 2 coffees and a concerned expression. She set 1 cup in front of me and pulled up a chair. She said she'd heard some stuff going around and wanted to check in with me. I asked what kind of stuff, already knowing it was about Tara, but hoping maybe it was just regular work gossip. Madeline said someone in marketing had mentioned that I'd apparently been a difficult friend who couldn't handle other people's success, that I'd been unsupportive when my friend was going through relationship problems and had sabotaged her professionally out of spite. I felt my stomach drop, even though I'd known this was happening. Madeline immediately said she'd told them that was complete garbage because it didn't match the person she knew at all. She'd worked with me for 2 years, and I'd always been supportive and professional, had covered for colleagues when they needed time off, had celebrated other people's promotions without any hint of jealousy. She asked if I wanted to talk about what was actually happening. I gave her the short version, hitting the main points without going into every painful detail. The years of one-sided friendship. The borrowed items returned damaged or not at all. The mockery and insults. The unauthorized job reference. Madeline's face got progressively more angry as I talked. When I finished, she said that was absolutely unacceptable, and she was sorry I'd gone through that. She offered to set the record straight if she heard the rumors again, to tell people they had the story completely backwards. I thanked her and said I appreciated it, but she didn't have to fight my battles for me. She said it wasn't about fighting battles. It was about telling the truth when she heard lies about someone she respected. That conversation with Madeline helped me see something I'd been struggling with. The people who actually mattered in my life either knew the truth or trusted me enough to ask before believing gossip. Zoe had been there for years and knew exactly who Tara was. Nolan had initially believed Tara, but reconsidered once he heard my side and recognized patterns in his own experiences. Madeline had worked with me long enough to know my character and dismissed the rumors immediately. These were the people whose opinions actually affected my life and relationships. The acquaintances and near strangers who sided with Tara based solely on her version probably weren't close enough friends to matter in any real way. They didn't know me well enough to have an informed opinion, so their judgment said more about them than about me. I realized I'd been trying to control a narrative that I couldn't actually control and didn't need to. Tara could tell whatever story she wanted to, whoever would listen. The people who knew me would see through it. The people who didn't know me well enough to question it weren't really part of my life anyway. This understanding helped me let go of the anxiety about what people were saying. I stopped checking social media to see if anyone was talking about us. I stopped mentally rehearsing explanations for people who might confront me. I just focused on being myself and maintaining the relationships that were actually healthy and reciprocal. 4 months had passed since the initial HR call when Madeline appeared at my desk again, this time looking more worried than concerned. She glanced around to make sure no one was nearby before leaning in and telling me that Tara had applied for another position at our company. Different department this time, not one I managed or even worked with regularly. But Madeline had heard through someone in HR that Tara had listed several mutual friends as references, and she wanted to warn me in case Tara was planning to use the new position to create workplace drama or force interaction between us. My first reaction was frustration that Tara was trying again after being rejected the first time. My second reaction was anxiety about potentially seeing her in the building every day, running into her in the cafeteria or parking lot. Madeline said she didn't know if Tara would actually get the position, but thought I should know it was happening. I thanked her for the heads up and said I appreciated her looking out for me. After she left, I sat at my desk trying to process how I felt about this development. Part of me wanted to call HR and ask them to reject her application automatically. But I knew that wasn't how it worked, and probably wasn't ethical either. I'd given my honest assessment when asked, and that was in her file. What happened from here was up to the other department's hiring managers. I walked down to HR during my lunch break and asked to speak with Felix Sampson. He remembered me from the previous reference call and invited me into his office. I explained that I'd heard Tara applied for a different position and wanted to understand what that meant for me. Felix pulled up her file and confirmed the application was for a department I didn't work with or interact with regularly. He assured me that my previous reference was in her file and would be considered by the hiring committee. But ultimately, the decision was up to that department's managers, and they might weight different factors than my assessment. I asked if there was anything preventing someone from working at the company if they'd received a negative reference for a different position. Felix said no, that each position was evaluated independently, though reference history was certainly considered. I felt anxious about the possibility of working in the same building as Tara, imagining awkward elevator rides and tense encounters in common spaces. But Felix reminded me that this was a large company with multiple floors and departments. Even if she got hired, we might rarely cross paths. I thanked him for the information and left his office trying to remind myself that I couldn't control Tara's choices, only my own responses. If she got the job, I'd deal with it by maintaining my boundaries and focusing on my work. If she didn't get the job, that was the company's decision based on their evaluation of her qualifications and references. 3 weeks later, I learned through Zoe that Tara didn't get the position. I felt immediate relief, followed by curiosity about why. Zoe said she'd heard through the friend network that someone in that department had known Tara from a previous job where she'd had performance issues. Apparently she'd called in sick frequently when she was actually interviewing elsewhere and had been fired for lying about her availability. This person had shared that information during the hiring discussion, and it had been the deciding factor. I sat with this information feeling a complicated mix of emotions. On one hand, I was validated that I wasn't the only person who'd seen problems with Tara's reliability and integrity. The pattern of burned bridges was becoming clear. She hadn't just alienated me through her behavior, she'd created similar issues in other areas of her life. On the other hand, I felt genuinely sad about it. This was someone I'd known for 15 years, had shared so many experiences with, and she'd damaged so many relationships through her own choices. The job rejections, the lost friendships, the isolation she was experiencing were all natural consequences of how she'd treated people. But that didn't make it less tragic to watch someone self-destruct like this. The work networking event was mandatory for department managers, which was the only reason I attended. I hated these things normally, but my boss had made it clear that showing up was expected. I grabbed a name tag and a glass of wine and tried to look engaged while people discussed quarterly projections and team-building strategies. That's when this guy approached me and introduced himself as Brian Coulter from the sales department. He'd noticed my name tag and said he'd heard good things about my team's recent project. We started talking about work stuff initially, but the conversation quickly shifted to hiking when he mentioned planning a weekend trip to a nearby trail I'd been wanting to try. Suddenly, we were comparing favorite routes and discussing the best seasons for different elevations. Then he mentioned trying a new recipe for trail mix, and we discovered we both loved cooking and experimenting with new dishes. The conversation flowed easily and naturally in a way I hadn't experienced in a long time. He knew nothing about my history with Tara, had no context for any of the drama that had consumed so much of my energy lately. Our friendship was developing based purely on shared interests and compatible personalities. No baggage, no complicated history, just two people who enjoyed similar things and got along well. When the networking event ended, Brian suggested we exchange numbers and maybe grab coffee sometime to swap hiking recommendations. I agreed immediately, feeling genuinely excited about making a new friend. Spending time with him reminded me what it was like to build connections organically, rather than maintaining them out of loyalty to shared history. 2 weeks later, Brian invited me to join his regular hiking group for their monthly trip. He said they were a casual bunch who just enjoyed getting outdoors together, no pressure or expectations. I met them at the trailhead on a Saturday morning and immediately felt comfortable with the group dynamic. There were 6 of us total, and everyone was friendly and welcoming without being overwhelming. We hiked for 4 hours, stopping occasionally to take photos or point out interesting plants and wildlife. During lunch at a scenic overlook, conversation ranged from work stories to travel plans to recipe exchanges. Someone mentioned needing help moving next month, and 3 people immediately offered their trucks and labor. Another person talked about a difficult situation with their family, and everyone listened supportively without trying to fix it or judge. On the drive home, I realized this was what reciprocity looked like. People showing up for each other consistently, contributing equally to plans and conversations, actually following through on commitments. The contrast with my friendship with Tara was stark and painful. I'd spent so many years accepting crumbs and calling it friendship, tolerating one-sided dynamics because I valued our history. But these people were showing me what healthy friendships actually involved. Over the next few weeks, the hiking group became a regular part of my life. We planned weekend trips to different trails. We had a group chat where people shared recipes and restaurant recommendations. When someone's car broke down, another member offered rides until it was fixed. When someone got a promotion, we all celebrated together. This was the kind of social circle I'd been missing without even realizing it. 5 months after the initial HR call, I received an unexpected text from Tara's mom. She said she was just checking in to see how I was doing. She mentioned that Tara was still in therapy and working on herself, which she was proud to see. But she wanted me to know she didn't expect or pressure me to reconcile with Tara. She understood that I needed to do what was healthy for me, and she respected that decision. Her message was kind, without being manipulative, supportive, without asking for anything in return. I felt genuinely touched by her reaching out with no agenda beyond basic human kindness. I texted back thanking her for understanding and saying I appreciated her kindness over the years. I told her I was glad Tara was getting help and hoped it led to real growth for her. I genuinely meant it. I wanted Tara to become healthier and happier, to develop better relationship patterns and stop hurting people. I just didn't want to be part of that journey or risk getting hurt again in the process. Tara's mom responded saying she understood completely and wished me well. The exchange left me feeling peaceful in a way I hadn't expected. There was no guilt or pressure, just mutual respect and genuine care. I was sitting in a coffee shop working on some reports when I overheard two women at the next table discussing a difficult friendship situation. One of them was talking about finally ending a long-term friendship with someone who only showed up when they needed something. She described her former friend as someone who would disappear for months, then suddenly reappear asking for favors. Who would borrow things and never return them? Who would cancel plans last minute, but expect everyone to drop everything when she wanted attention? The description sounded so much like Tara that I had to stop myself from turning around and joining their conversation. The other woman was validating her friend's decision, saying she'd been through something similar and how hard it was to end a friendship that had lasted so long. But she emphasized that longevity didn't make a relationship healthy, and sometimes walking away was the most self-loving choice you could make. I sat there realizing these dynamics were common. I wasn't alone in having to end a friendship that became toxic. Other people were going through similar experiences and making similar difficult choices. The validation from complete strangers who knew nothing about my specific situation was unexpected, but deeply comforting. It confirmed what I'd been learning over the past few months. That healthy relationships require reciprocity and respect. That ending toxic friendships isn't cruelty, but self-care. That I deserved better than what Tara had been willing to give. A week later, Zoe called me sounding tired and frustrated. She asked if we could meet for coffee because she needed to talk about something. I agreed, and we met at our usual spot the next afternoon. She ordered her drink and sat down across from me with this heavy expression on her face. She told me she was cutting back on her contact with Tara significantly. I asked what happened, and she explained that Tara had asked her to lie to a potential employer about her work history. Tara wanted Zoe to say they worked together at a company where Tara had actually been fired for attendance issues. Zoe refused because she wasn't going to risk her own reputation by lying for someone else. Tara got angry and accused Zoe of being disloyal and not supporting her when she needed help. Zoe said the whole conversation made her realize that Tara saw friends as tools to use rather than people to respect. I felt bad that Zoe was going through similar issues with Tara, but also relieved that I wasn't the only one seeing these patterns. It validated everything I'd experienced and made me feel less guilty about my own boundaries. Zoe said she was done making excuses for Tara's behavior and was going to focus on friendships that felt healthy and balanced. 6 months after the initial HR call, I came home from work to find an actual letter in my mailbox. Not a text or email, but a real handwritten envelope with my name and address on it. The return address was Tara's parents' house. I carried it inside and stared at it for several minutes before opening it. The letter was 3 pages long in Tara's handwriting. She started by saying she wasn't asking for reconciliation or expecting me to respond. She just wanted me to know she'd been working on herself and understood now how badly she'd treated me. She listed specific things she'd done wrong. The birthday dinner where she showed up late and complained. My birthday when she ditched me for Blake's pool party. The times she borrowed my things and returned them damaged or not at all. The wallpaper comment and all the mocking she did with Blake. The way she accused me of trying to break them up when I was actually the only person who showed up for her. She took responsibility for each thing without making excuses or blaming Blake or her emotional state. She said she'd been in therapy for 4 months and was starting to see how she used people instead of valuing them. She acknowledged that she put me down as a reference without asking, which was disrespectful and presumptuous. She said she understood why I was honest with HR and that she would have done the same thing in my position. The letter ended with her saying she hoped I was doing well and that she was working on becoming a better person, not to win me back, but because she needed to change for herself. The whole thing felt different from her previous apologies. There was no manipulation or guilt tripping, no requests for forgiveness or expectations that I'd reach out, just accountability and acknowledgement of the damage she'd caused. I sat on my couch reading the letter multiple times over the next few days. I kept looking for hidden manipulation or signs that she was just saying what she thought I wanted to hear. But the letter didn't ask for anything from me. It didn't try to minimize what she'd done or shift blame. It just acknowledged the reality of her behavior and took responsibility for it. I talked about it with Zoe over lunch one day. She read the letter carefully and said it sounded like real growth, but cautioned that words were easy and actions over time mattered more. She reminded me that Tara had apologized before, only to go right back to the same patterns. I also showed it to Brian during one of our hiking trips. He said it seemed genuine, but that I shouldn't feel pressured to respond or reconcile just because she wrote a nice letter. Both of them emphasized that my boundaries were valid regardless of whether Tara was actually changing. I appreciated their perspective because it helped me think clearly instead of getting caught up in emotions or guilt. After sitting with it for almost a week, I decided to respond briefly. I wrote back thanking her for the letter and acknowledging that it takes courage to own your mistakes the way she had. I told her I appreciated the apology and hoped she continued working on herself. I didn't offer reconciliation or suggest we rebuild the friendship. I didn't say I forgave her or that things were okay between us. I just acknowledged her effort and wished her well in her growth. The response felt right when I sent it. It wasn't cold or mean, but it also wasn't falsely warm or encouraging. It was honest and boundaried, which was exactly what I needed it to be. A week after I sent my response, Madeline mentioned at work that she'd heard Tara got fired from her department store job. Apparently, she'd been calling in sick repeatedly when she was actually going to job interviews. Someone saw her at an interview when she was supposed to be home with the flu and reported it to management. They fired her for dishonesty and lack of integrity. When Madeline told me, I felt this weird mix of emotions. I didn't take pleasure in it or feel happy that she lost her job, but I also recognized it as a natural consequence of her choices. She was creating her own problems through her behavior patterns. The lying, the dishonesty, the expectation that rules didn't apply to her. These weren't things happening to her, but things she was actively doing that led to predictable results. It reinforced my decision to maintain boundaries, because even with therapy, she was still making choices that showed poor judgment and lack of integrity. 2 days later, Nolan messaged me asking if we could talk. We met for coffee, and he looked uncomfortable as he sat down. He told me he'd ended his friendship with Tara after she lied to him about why she needed to borrow money. She'd said it was for car repairs, but he later found out she wanted it for concert tickets. When he confronted her about the lie, she got defensive and said it shouldn't matter what she needed the money for, because friends help each other. He said he felt guilty about ending a friendship that had lasted so long, but also relieved to not deal with the drama anymore. We talked for over an hour about how hard it is to walk away from long-term friendships, even when they're clearly unhealthy. He thanked me for being honest with him months ago when we first talked about Tara. He said it helped him recognize patterns he'd been ignoring for years. The entitlement, the lying, the way she only showed up when she needed something. He'd been making excuses for her behavior just like I had, and finally admitting the friendship was toxic felt like a weight lifting. 7 months after the initial incident with HR, my manager called me into her office. I felt nervous at first, but she smiled and told me to sit down. She said she was giving me additional responsibilities in the department and a raise to go with them. She specifically mentioned my integrity and reliability as reasons for the promotion. She said I consistently demonstrated good judgment and could be trusted to handle sensitive situations appropriately. As I walked back to my desk, I thought about how different things would be if I'd lied to HR for Tara. I would have compromised my professional reputation for someone who never valued me. I would have put my job at risk to help someone who'd spent years treating me badly. The promotion felt like confirmation that doing the right thing, even when it's hard, matters in ways you can't always predict. Brian invited me to dinner at his place the following weekend and mentioned his sister would be there. Her name was Rachel, and she was visiting from out of state. We hit it off immediately over shared interests in books and cooking. She was funny and kind and genuinely interested in hearing about my life. Before she left, she asked if I'd be interested in starting a monthly book club with her and some of her friends who lived in the area. I agreed, and we had our first meeting 3 weeks later. The group was 6 people total, and we met at different houses each month. Everyone actually showed up on time, brought the snacks they'd promised, and had read the book. We had real discussions about themes and characters, and nobody dominated the conversation or made it about themselves. It reminded me of the wine and movie nights I used to have with Tara, except this was built on mutual respect and actual participation. These people valued the tradition we were creating together. I ran into Tara's mom at the grocery store on a Saturday afternoon. We both stopped when we saw each other, and there was this brief, awkward moment before she smiled. We talked for a few minutes in the produce section. She told me Tara was doing better in therapy and had found a new job where she was trying to apply what she was learning. She said Tara was working on being more honest and reliable. I told her I was genuinely happy to hear that and meant it. I wished Tara well in her growth and hoped she could build healthier relationships. As I drove home, I realized I could want good things for Tara without wanting her back in my life. Her growth and happiness didn't require my participation or forgiveness. I could hope she became a better person while still maintaining the boundaries I needed for my own well-being. Zoe came over for dinner a few nights later, and we ended up talking for hours about everything we'd learned from the situation with Tara. We discussed how loyalty doesn't mean accepting mistreatment and how real friendship requires reciprocity and respect. Zoe said the experience taught her to pay attention to patterns instead of isolated incidents. One mistake is forgivable, but a pattern of behavior reveals character. We talked about how we'd both become more intentional about the relationships we invested in. We were quicker to recognize red flags and more willing to walk away from dynamics that didn't serve us. It wasn't about being cold or unforgiving, but about valuing ourselves enough to expect basic respect and consideration. The conversation felt important because we were both processing how much we'd grown through something painful. We'd learned to set boundaries without guilt and to prioritize our own well-being over maintaining relationships that had become toxic. A couple weeks later, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. I almost deleted it without reading, but something made me check. It was Tara. She'd gotten a new phone and wanted to know if we could meet one more time. She said she wasn't asking to restart the friendship, but wanted closure and to make amends in person. I stared at the message for a long time, my thumb hovering over the delete button. Part of me wanted to ignore it completely and move on, but another part wondered if maybe hearing her out would help me close that chapter for good. I talked it over with Zoe that night at her place. She asked what I hoped to get out of meeting Tara. I told her I wasn't sure, but that I felt like I owed it to the 15 years we'd spent together to at least listen. Zoe said that was fair, as long as I went in with clear boundaries and didn't let Tara manipulate me into anything. I spent the next few days thinking about what those boundaries were. I wouldn't offer friendship again. I wouldn't lie or sugarcoat things to make her feel better. I wouldn't let her blame me for consequences she created herself. Once I had those clear in my mind, I texted back and agreed to meet at a coffee shop downtown that neither of us had history with. Neutral territory felt important. The morning of the meeting, I woke up anxious with my stomach in knots. I changed clothes 3 times before settling on jeans and a sweater. Nothing fancy, but not sloppy either. I got to the coffee shop 15 minutes early and ordered a latte I didn't really want, just to have something to do with my hands. When Tara walked in, I almost didn't recognize her. She looked different in a way that was hard to pinpoint. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail instead of the styled waves she used to wear. She had on minimal makeup and wore plain clothes that looked comfortable rather than trendy. She spotted me and walked over, her expression nervous but not defensive. She thanked me for agreeing to meet and asked if she could sit. I nodded, and she took the chair across from me, setting down her own coffee cup. For a minute, we just sat there in uncomfortable silence. Then she took a breath and started talking. She said she'd been working with a therapist for the past few months on understanding her patterns with people. She admitted she had a habit of using others and avoiding responsibility for her actions. She said losing multiple friendships, including ours, had been a huge wake-up call that she couldn't ignore anymore. I listened without interrupting, trying to gauge how genuine this was versus another attempt to get what she wanted. But her tone was different from before. She wasn't making excuses or deflecting. She looked me in the eye and acknowledged specific things she'd done wrong. She talked about the years of taking me for granted, always expecting me to be available when she needed something, but never showing up when I needed her. She mentioned how she'd prioritized Blake and his lifestyle over our friendship, treating me like I was boring and pathetic for wanting to maintain our traditions. She said she understood now that she'd been cruel and dismissive. Then she brought up the job reference and I tensed up, waiting for her to blame me again. But instead, she said she understood why I'd said no. She admitted that putting my name down without asking had been manipulative and unfair. She said she'd been hoping I'd feel obligated to help her because of our history, which wasn't right. She told me that if she'd been in my position after everything she'd put me through, she would have done the same thing. There was no defensiveness in her voice, no attempt to make me feel guilty, just honest recognition that she'd created this situation herself. I took a sip of my latte and let her words sink in. This wasn't the Tara I'd argued with in my apartment lobby or the one who'd shown up with Blake to mock my life. This person seemed genuinely different, more grounded and aware. I told her I appreciated her honesty and that I could see she was doing real work on herself. I said it took courage to own up to hurting people the way she had. But then I told her clearly that I wasn't interested in rebuilding the friendship. I explained that it wasn't because I hadn't forgiven her or wanted her to fail. It was because I'd moved forward and built new relationships that were healthier and more balanced. I'd learned what real reciprocity looked like, and I couldn't go back to a dynamic where I was always giving and she was always taking. She nodded slowly and said she understood. She told me she wasn't expecting me to take her back and that she was focused on being better for herself and any future relationships she built. We sat there for another moment before I asked how things were going with her job and therapy. She said she'd found a position at a small marketing firm where the expectations were clear and she was trying to show up consistently. She mentioned her therapist had helped her see how much of her identity had been wrapped up in being the cool party girl, and now she was figuring out who she actually was without that persona. I shared some updates about my life too, about the promotion at work and the new friends I'd been spending time with. We talked for about an hour, sharing pieces of our lives without the weight of expectation or obligation hanging over us. It felt strange talking to her like this, almost like we were acquaintances catching up rather than people who'd known each other for 15 years. But I realized that was okay. Not all relationships are meant to last forever, and some endings are necessary even when they hurt. When we finished our coffee, we stood up to leave. Tara paused by the door and thanked me for being honest with HR all those months ago. She said that losing the job had been painful at the time and she'd hated me for it. But now she could see it had forced her to confront patterns she'd been avoiding her whole life. She said she was grateful now even though it hadn't felt that way back then. I told her I appreciated that perspective and wished her well in her continued growth. We didn't hug or make promises to stay in touch. We just said goodbye and walked in different directions. On the drive home, I felt something I hadn't expected. A sense of closure I didn't know I'd been missing. The friendship was definitely over, but it had ended with mutual understanding rather than bitterness. That felt important somehow. I texted Zoe when I got home and told her about the conversation. She said she was proud of me for maintaining my boundaries while still being kind. Brian texted back something similar when I filled him in later that evening. The next few days, I found myself thinking about how much I'd grown over the past 8 months. I'd gone from someone who tolerated mistreatment out of loyalty to someone who could advocate for myself and walk away from relationships that didn't serve me. The pain of losing a 15-year friendship had taught me valuable lessons about reciprocity, boundaries, and the difference between being kind and being a doormat. I'd learned that real friendship requires both people to show up, not just one person constantly giving while the other takes. I'd learned that ending a toxic relationship isn't cruel or heartless, it's self-care. That weekend, Brian's hiking group invited me on a camping trip they'd been planning for months. I said yes immediately, genuinely excited about it in a way I hadn't felt about social plans in years. These were people who showed up when they said they would, who contributed equally to plans, who cared about my life as much as I cared about theirs. This was what friendship was supposed to feel like. Sitting around the campfire that first night, listening to everyone laugh and share stories, I felt grateful for where I'd ended up. The whole situation with Tara had been painful, but it had ultimately helped me become more careful about who I let into my life. I'd learned to recognize red flags earlier and to trust my gut when something felt off. I'd learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is walk away from people who don't value you. Back at work the following week, my manager called me into her office to discuss taking on a leadership role for a new project. I accepted, feeling confident in my abilities and my judgment. I was thriving professionally, surrounded by genuine friends and clear about my boundaries. The whole experience with Tara had changed me in ways I was still discovering. I'd become more discerning, more willing to advocate for myself, more comfortable with the idea that not everyone deserves access to my life. And I'd learned that ending a toxic friendship isn't failure or giving up. It's growth. It's choosing yourself. It's recognizing that loyalty shouldn't come at the cost of your own well-being. I was in a really good place now, better than I'd been in years. And I'd gotten here by learning to let go of someone who didn't value me, by building new connections based on mutual respect, and by finally understanding that I deserved friendships where both people showed up equally.